What's up YouTube? Capital G here, checking out the new Abyss archetype from Ancient Guardians. We got a lot of cards to talk about, so I am not going to dawdle at all. We're going to get straight into it. This archetype's monster breakdown is level 4s, level 8s, and then I believe the ultimate boss monster is like a level 10 monster. Anyways, the first couple of level 4s both have effects that are kind of like Foolish Burial effects, where you can discard them from the hand and then you can send a monster from the archetype, or really any reptile, you can send those to the graveyard. So it's basically like a quick Foolish Burial. The thing is, you have to send a different attribute, and this archetype is actually chaos based, so I don't know, maybe you can play some cheeky, BLS or Chaos Sorcerer or something like that in the archetype. The first card, Null, is an amazing setup card. Not only does it have that Foolish Burial effect, but then it also freely summons itself from the graveyard. It does this if you control no monsters, or if you happen to have only an Abyss monster, or excuse me, one Abyss monster on the field. I mean, you should technically always be able to meet those conditions, because if you have like one monster, then you're good. If you have no monsters, then you're good as well. This is an amazing card, honestly, in a vacuum. Not only does it get the deck rolling, but then it freely summons itself for free. And this archetype does, like the higher monsters, require tributes on field, so this kind of fulfills that condition as well. The next one is another card that has that Foolish Burial type effect. The second effect is a little different, where if it's normal summoned or special summoned, then you can add a spell and trap from the Abyss archetype from your deck to your hand. So this is another card that feels like a really solid, this might be your standard normal summon, so that you just go +1. The stats on these first two cards are not really good. Well, offensively, they both have 0 attack, but they're just starter cards, so I'm fine with them having basically no stats, because these are cards that are +1s. And also, I think King of the Feral Imps probably is going to be played, because I believe that Null locks you into reptiles for the rest of the turn, but I believe King of the Feral Imps has to be a reptile, right? Like that would be the only thing that makes sense. This archetype doesn't have any Xyz or links, and oh my god, it's just, this archetype is begging for Xyz monsters. It really is. Now the next one, Philogi, is really cool. This card has a crazy powerful effect. So the next two monsters both have recovery, well, kind of like Warrior Returning Alive effects, where you can discard a card or send a card from your hand to the graveyard and then add them from the graveyard. But they also have effects that activate where if they're sent from the field to the graveyard, or if they're reborn from the graveyard. So this guy, if he is reborn, or if he's sent from the field to the graveyard, what he allows you to do is you can target a face-up monster on your opponent's side of the field, and then one in their graveyard that has an attack that's equal or less than that monster, higher than that monster. If you do, you get to reborn your opponent's monster in the graveyard and then send their monster from the hand or from their field to the graveyard. So that is an incredible momentum swing. I mean, imagine being able to kill your opponent's boss monster on field without destroying it, and at the same time just take something from their graveyard and do whatever you want with that card. And also, the monster that you revive, there's no restrictions on it. You can just summon it in attack mode. You can activate its effects. You can attack with it. I was kind of surprised that there were no restrictions on it. I really thought that it would have its effects negated or something like that. The next one is the Stratos for the archetype, and I don't think I've said this in a long time. I don't like the Stratos that much. Its effect activates the same way the last card does, where if it's sent from the field to the graveyard, or if it's reborn, you get to basically Rhoda for anything in the archetype, or any monster, except another copy of itself. The problem is, it has kind of a catch on it, and that catch is you have to also let your opponent draw a card, and then both of you send a card from your hand to the graveyard. That's not good, in my opinion. Specifically because of the age we live in, where if you look at the best meta decks, Virtual World and Drytron, Eldorado, there are just too many cards that they can use from the graveyard. Like, if you give Virtual World a draw, they're just going to send one of their spells and traps to the grave and then activate it. All Drytron monsters can be summoned from the graveyard. The entire Eldorado archetype works from the graveyard. So I don't want my opponent getting free cards, and I don't want them drawing. I've always been against letting my opponent draw cards, so not a fan of this archetype Stratos. Now, when we get to the high level monsters, for instance, the level 8, this is where you start having the tribute monsters on field to kind of like summon them. And the first level 8 is Curse. This is a card, again, it requires, if it's in the graveyard, you tribute a monster, and that's how you summon it. Your opponent does get to special summon a monster from their graveyard. From their graveyard, it doesn't like specify a position, but the monster's effects are negated. The important thing is, when you special summon this from the graveyard, or really if it's just special summon from anywhere, you get to target an Abyss monster that's level 4 or lower, and that monster is special summon. Now that's really good because think about it like this. If you were to normal summon, let's say the Spell and Trap Searcher, so you go +1, and then you could tribute it, you could summon this guy from the graveyard, and then you could reborn the same level 4 that you just tributed. So basically you would just kind of get like a free +1. Your opponent would get the summon, so that's unfortunate, but I don't know, maybe you can just run over their monster in battle or something like that. Like that'd be a nice way of kind of mitigating their plus. So this card feels like a stepping step, but it feels just kind of like a step to get to some of like the other boss monsters. Anyways, the next one is Aleph, and this one is, I don't really like this one. I'll just be honest, because it summons itself the same way where you tribute a monster. The problem is your opponent gets to add a monster from their graveyard to their hand, and that is just, no, I am not about that, dude. It's one thing if they get to summon a monster with no effects on their field that I can run over, but if you're telling me I'm going to give my opponent a hand trap back like a DD Crow or a Skullmeister, which, I mean, based on what I see, absolutely wrecks this archetype. I just think that your opponent's probably going to reuse their hand traps if you give them the opportunity. This card, when it's special summon, you get to target 2 of your banished monsters, put them back into your graveyard. One of them has to be a reptile. I'm not playing this card, period. So I'm not really going to talk about more of it because I think letting your opponent reuse their monsters is just terrible. Now, the king and the queen are very good. The king is Aaron, and this one requires 2. So now we're talking about giving up more than 1 monster, which, again, DD Crow and Skullmeister, man, got to be careful. These cards tribute as cost from the field, or they require you to tribute monsters on field as cost. But this one says if your opponent adds a card to their hand, except during the draw phase, you get to send one of the cards in their hand at random to the graveyard. That obviously is crazy good. It's basically like a baby Dark Law. Doesn't banish the card, but still very, very strong in my opinion. And then if your opponent's card is sent to the graveyard by an effect, you can add a light or dark reptile from your deck to your hand. So this feels like a pretty strong card in my opinion. The queen is arguably just as strong, maybe even better. The queen allows you, same summoning condition. The queen says if a monster is special summoned from your opponent's graveyard, you can send 1 card they control to the grave. That is just crazy good. Think about Virtual World, think about El Dorado, think about Drytron. They all have so many monsters that they summon from the graveyard, all Drytrons, you know, whether it be Lord or if you're playing against Virtual World, Roshi and also Nian Nian, the new trap card. Like being able to send one of their cards from the field is just crazy good. Also, does not target. So this is also your Dragoon out, technically. The third effect says if a monster is sent from your opponent's hand or deck to the graveyard, you get to special summon one of your light or dark reptile monsters from your graveyard except Queen. I think they want you to ideally summon King with this. And this is another card that feels just quite, I don't know, quite relevant for today. I mean, if your opponent foolishes anything, you get to just trigger this effect. In Virtual World, I mean, they foolish a lot. They don't always foolish monsters, but all of their summoning requirements require like foolish effects. And then also, you know, Drytron, if they summon any monster from the hand, they have to, you know, send another monster from hand. So like this is a pretty easy effect to trigger. King and Queen are both very solid in my opinion. I don't know if you're going to run Deity. Deity is the biggest boss monster, but this dude requires 3 monsters to be tributed from the field as a cost, man. And just imagine if you were to tribute 3 real monsters and then your opponent just DD Crows this, because tributing is a cost. Or if your opponent Skullmeisters this, I feel like you would auto lose. So I'm thinking you might have to build this deck like Tellarknights. You might have to play a bunch of Oasis of the Dragon Souls and Back to the Fronts and Call of the Haunted. But your on-field effect with this guy, and he's got great stats, is once while face up, quick effect, you can send all monsters on the field to the graveyard except monsters that were special summoned from the graveyard. So very solid effect. You know, I love the fact that there's no destruction here with this archetype. It's all sin, so that's really good. Non-targeting, also very good. I'm definitely liking that, but I'm just thinking the summoning condition is kind of rough. Feels like you might have to, you know, maybe try to Monster Reborn this guy. The field spell, which is easily searchable. The first effect is if a reptile monster you control is destroyed by an opponent's card, battle, or effect, You get to target a card your opponent controls, send it to the graveyard. It's basically a better version of the Crawler Field spell because it can send spells and traps. Also, if your opponent, uses any type of cards to kill your stuff, you basically get a free plus, or you get to take something down. Now, if this card is sent from the field zone to the graveyard by an opponent's card effect, then you get to excavate cards equivalent to the number of reptiles you have in your graveyard with different names. That's nice. Kind of like just like a nice little bonus effect. Kind of like something went bad, but at least you're not completely screwed. Not bad. The continuous trap I think is solid. It can be a disruptive card, and it does trigger Queen, if I'm not mistaken. This is a card that during the main phase, you contribute a reptile, target a monster in your opponent's graveyard. You get to summon it, but you have to send it to the graveyard during the end phase. This is fine. I think if your opponent is trying to summon from their graveyard, this is an excellent way to disrupt them. And this is another way of sending your level 4s to the graveyard during your opponent's turn, or I guess the only one, the easiest way, basically. So this can be a disruptive card. It actually triggers your level 4s. It can trigger Queen as well. If it's sent from the Spell and Trap zone to the graveyard, you send all non-reptile monsters you control to the graveyard. I mean, that can kind of be relevant, but even if you don't, you're going to lose your reptiles or your non-reptiles anyway, so it's only a matter of time, basically. Now, the last card, I think, had actually broken potential, but Konami put restrictions on it, like really hefty restrictions, and I think they really hurt the card, but I understand why they did it. It's a trap card, and it gives you tokens. You special summon 2 Abyss tokens, 0/0, and then if you have 8 Abyss monsters with different names, which is basically all of them, in your graveyard, instead of summoning tokens, you get to just special summon any 2 Abyss monsters. I think the reason they made this a trap is because they know if they just allowed every Yu-Gi-Oh deck to just summon 2 tokens, I mean, it would basically be like Baby Link Cross. If they made this a spell card, we all know that people would play this in Link decks. I mean, they would just splash this in Link decks, and then this card would probably end up getting banned. So that's why I think they made it a trap, but I don't know, maybe they could have made it a spell, but you had to have like an Abyss monster on field. Like, that would have been crazy good. They're also reprinting Snake Rain, and I don't know if Reasoning is going to work in this deck, like on Infernoids, because I think this deck is kind of similar to Infernoids, because this deck has too much of the same level, like 4 and 8. But I do think this deck seems pretty cool. I think hand traps that are being played right now actually do murder this deck, so that's a bit of a problem, but it'll be interesting to see what exactly people do with the deck. Anyways, whatever you guys think, you leave that in the comment section below.